Before we talk about Iran, we need to talk about how we are being told to think about Iran. And right now, if you open social media or any mainstream news channel, you will see a very specific picture being painted: chaos, collapse. But does that picture match reality on the ground? So, in this video, I am not going to give you slogans or viral clips. I am going to make you walk through what's actually happening and why so much of what you see online is not reporting or journalism but information warfare. It's not a coincidence that two countries are currently dominating news right now. Which are those two countries, Iran and Venezuela? And both have been under severe sanctions for years. Both have refused to align themselves with US and Western strategic interests, and in both cases, economic pressure is then used to manufacture political narratives about instability, illegitimacy, and imminent collapse. So, when people ask what is actually happening in Iran, the first thing is this: you cannot understand what you are seeing unless you understand information warfare. What people are encountering online does not match what is happening on the ground, and the gap between perception and reality is precisely where information warfare operates.
The core operational logic of contemporary Western interference in Iran is hybrid warfare, the fusion of digital information warfare and physical violence into an interdependent system. Yet this model contains the seed of its own strategic failure. It is an engineered construct, fundamentally lacking the organic, sustainable momentum of a genuine mass movement. It manufactures a persuasive parallel reality online that remains decisively disconnected from the political and social facts.
If you rely only on social media or mainstream Western news channel, you will think that Iran is on the verge of total collapse. Your feed is flooded with short video clips of protest riots, emotional testimonies, almost all framed as a spontaneous, organic, nationwide uprising against what is constantly described as Islamic regime. But the reality is both more complex and in some ways much simpler. And to understand what's going on, you have to move away from emotional footage and ask some basic material questions. What are the economic conditions? What political forces are actually involved? And most importantly, who benefits from the way this unrest is being framed and amplified? And one thing that stands out immediately is this: that what distinguishes the current situation is not the scale of unrest inside Iran, it's the scale of attention outside Iran, and the volume of digital content such as hashtags like free Iran, edited clips, instant commentary. It is completely disproportionate to the level of actual mobilization on the ground.
We saw these infiltrations, and then rioters began to get involved. And these were not ordinary rioters. They were very well trained, and many of them had weapons. They started killing police officers and other people. And then you had Pompeo bragging that the Mossad was on the ground, and of course, he was the head of the CIA. You had the Mossad itself gave a Persian language statement saying that we're on the ground. And then more recently, Channel 14 in Israel stated that a foreign government, obviously it was them in the United States, sent in weapons, and that's why hundreds of Iranian police officers and security people were killed. So they're admitting it, but for some reason, pundits in mainstream media and these elites, they're pretending. I mean, anyone who sees the footage and anyone who sees what the Mossad and others said, it's clear as day. I mean, it's ironic coming from Western media at a time when a young woman is shot in the face, and the debate in the United States is whether she was not turning right enough, and so she was fair game. And Trump obviously said, yeah, she deserved getting shot in the face. So in the case of the footage that you see in Tehran, these people have firearms and they're killing police officers. So the whole thing is completely misrepresented. It's basically done intentionally because I think the whole thing was to make the case for war.
Social media creates the appearance of mass protest even when such event does not happen. And this is not accidental. This reflects a shift in how destabilization works. today, and you no longer need millions of people in the streets to manufacture crisis. You need amplification until collapse feels inevitable. And once that perception is established, everything else follows: sanctions, diplomatic isolation, covert action, and even military threats that can be presented not as aggression but as responses. And this is how perception becomes a weapon. Now, let me be very clear about something. It will be dishonest to pretend that economic grievances in Iran are fabricated. They are real. Inflation is real, currency decline is real, living conditions have worsened for many people. But the immediate trigger for recent protest began in Tehran market among traders and shopkeepers who had real grievances. But protests, they do not exist in a vacuum. These grievances emerge within an environment shaped by sanctions, economic warfare, media framing, NGO influence, foreign funding, and intelligence operations. And when these protests they lack organization and anti-imperialist political consciousness, they become extremely vulnerable to infiltration and manipulation. And this is not speculation. This is not something that I am personally speculating. Even former US officials have admitted it openly. Mike Pompeo, he acknowledged Mossad activity inside Iran. Israeli officials, they have spoken publicly about operatives operating on Iranian soil. And this is not about supporting legitimate protest, it's about managing unrest, redirecting, escalating it, and turning protest into a riot. It's true that intelligence agencies do not invent contradictions from nothing. They intervene in already existing ones, selectively activating, financing them in ways that serve imperial strategy. From Syria to Libya to Venezuela, destabilization operates through capture, the redirection of real grievances into counter revolutionary trajectories. Imperialism, it first manufactures the condition of crisis, then rebrands the resulting discontent as evidence of internal failure, and finally intervene again, this time in the name of stability, democracy, or human rights. So, what appears as domestic contradictions is in reality an externally induced one that is later weaponized against the very state struggling to survive it. And we can see the consequences. These are not simply people expressing social demands. Infrastructure was burnt, banks were attacked, hospitals and medical centers were also targeted. Mosques were set on fire, fire trucks responding to emergencies were also attacked, firefighters were assaulted, civilians were killed, including kids, and there were rallies taken out in support of them. These patterns are familiar: hospitals, emergency services, economic infrastructure, places of worship, these are the usual target of the Zionist entity. But when similar tactics appear inside Iran, they are suddenly rebranded as resistance. This isn't journalism, this is information warfare. Recognizing imperialism as the primary contradiction does not mean endorsing every policy of the state, but it means understanding causality. It means recognizing that external domination is not one issue among many, it is the framework within which all internal conflicts are forced to operate. And this is where so called progressive analysis collapse. They flatten all contradictions into one moral category as of social conservatism, corruption, policing, and US sanctions. They exist on the same plane, they do not. So, when contradictions are treated as equal, the analysis quietly shifts towards the imperial power because only one side has the capacity to annihilate the society as a whole right now. So, history makes this painfully clear: Iraq, Libya, Syria, Venezuela, all the internal contradictions, they existed long before intervention. But once imperialism becomes the primary contradiction, every unresolved tension was exploited to justify war, sanctions, and regime destruction. And the result was not liberation, it was mass death, state collapse, and permanent instability. So, when people insist on abstract ideals demanding a perfect political system before resisting imperialism, they are not being radical, they are being reckless. They are asking entire population to absorb the cost of regime change experiments designed elsewhere. When I say that US imperialism is the primary contradictions, I am not claiming that secondary contradictions don't exist. That will be intellectually dishonest. And every society contains internal tensions, economic inequality, political repression, class conflict, gendered oppression, ethnic divisions, policy failures. And these contradictions are real and people experience them daily. But political analysis is not just about listing problems and trying to solve them without anti imperialist consciousness. It's about understanding which forces structures all the others. And under conditions of sanctions, covert warfare, intelligence penetration, economic strangulations, and constant threat of military escalation, imperialism becomes the dominant contradictions, the one that sets the limits within which all other contradictions unfold. And it reshapes the economy, hardens the state, narrows political space, and intensifies social stress. Secondary contradictions, they do not disappear, they are compressed, distorted, and weaponized. And this is why the language of why can't people just fix their own problems, it's misleading. You cannot resolve internal contradictions in a country that is being deliberately destabilized from the outside. You cannot expect protest under these conditions not to be infiltrated. There is also a tendency, especially among parts of the left, to imagine resistance as something that must first pass an ideological inspection. It has to be secular, it has to look a certain way, and it has to speak a certain language, and only then can it be supported. And this way of thinking does not emerge from struggle, it emerges from privilege, from arrogance. Resistance, it does not develop under ideal conditions, it develops under occupation, under siege. And most people, they do not sit down and design movements according to what will be most acceptable to an activist sensibilities. They resist with the tools, traditions, and organizational forms available to them at the moment they are being attacked, and this is how resistance has always worked everywhere. So, what some people on the left are really saying, often without realizing it, is that they're willing to wait. They can afford to wait for a better resistance to appear, but the people in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Yemen, or elsewhere, they cannot wait. They are already fighting Zionist American aggression with their bodies, with their families, with their lives. And to deny them solidarity because they fail to conform to an abstract secular ideal is to deny the reality of their struggle. And this does not mean there are no contradictions within these movements. Of course, there are. Every resistance has contradictions. The question again is one of the sequence. So, when an external force is trying to annihilate a people, the primary contradiction is not the internal character of the resistance but the aggression itself. And if you get that wrong, everything else that follows will also be wrong. And this is where political responsibility comes in. Criticizing resistance while remaining silent or far less critical towards imperialism and Zionism is not balanced. It shifts the burden of moral perfection onto the oppressed while allowing the structures of violence to pass as given. So the choice is very simple. Either you stand with those who are resisting imperial domination in the real world with all the imperfections, or you retreat into an imagined politics that never has to confront any sort of imperialism and never has to pay any price.